Welcome to our Basar class. We are in class number 9. We are discussing Yoreh Deah, Siman Pei Zayin, chapter 87. And we are doing Seifim, Beis Gimel and Daled. We've been in the midst of discussing a number of the Halachos pertaining to the items that are covered in the prohibition of Basar B'chalav. And this class is kind of wrapping up all of those ideas in a summary video before we move on to the next few Seifim in Pei Zayin. So for this one, let's talk about some of the halachos that we learned in each of the Seifim. So in Seif Beis, okay, we already have established there's an Isser Basar B'chalav. So in Seif Beis, we basically have covered the prohibition of Basar B'chalav that is prohibited by the Torah, okay, and that prohibition includes eating it, cooking it, and benefiting from it. And it's not limited to just a little goat, okay? It refers to all types of animals that are permitted for consumption, known as a behemah tahira, okay? That is the official halachic title for it. And there's no difference between cooking them in milk that came from their own mother or the milk that came from any other kosher animal, okay, or even from milk that it itself produced. And even if it's, when you're cooking the meat, the animal itself, even if it has not itself become old enough in order to produce milk, the idea is that these are all included in that prohibition. That's the first part of it. Okay, and we also learned that there are certain animals that don't fall into the category of a behemah. That's called a kvi or a koi. Okay, and we don't know if it's similar to a deer or if it's similar to a cow or a goat. Okay, we don't know which one it is. And animals that are a mixture between those two things, so we talked about that, and you can't cook them with milk, and they are a safek isur d'oraisa, where they are a doubtful prohibition for which the Torah has applied a prohibition to them. Okay, and so therefore you cannot cook them with milk from any behemah. Okay, and then the prohibition even includes a isur hana. So that was Seif Beis. Seif Gimel, okay, talks about cooking kosher meat with milk that comes from a non-kosher animal. So you take a steak from a cow and you cook it in camel milk, okay? Or you take a camel steak and you cook it in cow's milk. Okay, there's no prohibition of Basar B'chalav in this case that the Torah applies to it. And so the prohibition that attaches to them is based on the fact that those items that come from a behemah tameya, a non-kosher animal, an unacceptable animal, are themselves prohibited based on the fact that they're a behemah tameya. And there's a separate prohibition for that, not Basar B'chalav. And so therefore, there is a permission, okay, to cook them without, and also to benefit from them without fear of violating a Torah prohibition. So, for example, you might need this if you needed to create some type of bandage for a wound or treatment for a wound, whatever that would be. And that would even be for a person who is ill, who is not deathly ill, okay? Because you're benefiting from it. You're attaching it and placing it on the outside of your body. You're not putting it in your body, you're not consuming it. And another thing that we're allowed to do is to mix them together, okay, with a bitter substance, and that would even permit their consumption when you're having a sick person that is not in danger of dying. Why? Because when it's mixed with something bitter, we learn that it's shelo k'derech hanasan, that is a leniency that extends to items that are prohibited by Torah law, but you need them for whatever reason to get better, whatever that doctor at that time period thought would be a treatment with this. Okay, so you mix in something disgusting. That wouldn't work for Basar B'chalav, but would work for Isur Achila. Okay? So that is the reason why it's important to establish the uniqueness of the prohibition of Basar B'chalav. And it would also be permitted to benefit from them, okay, like to feed them to your animal, and therefore you could also sell them to a non-Jew. Okay. Now that was the Gemara that we saw. Nonetheless, most poskim hold that there is still a prohibition of marasayin to cook them together, and the Shach says that for cooking there is no prohibition at all. That seems to stem with the opinion of the Ramah that we saw there. So there's room to be lenient. The other thing that we learned is that basar chayav oif, right? So deer meat or chicken meat, okay, that are cooked with kosher milk. This is another exception to the rule of basar b'chalav. There's no basar b'chalav applied to those meats from the Torah, but there is one applied rabbinically. As we saw, that was the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and we saw that we had a big limud back and forth in class number 7 about which way we learn and understand that opinion of Rabbi Akiva in light of other sections of the Gemara. So that was how we understood it. Now, according to most poskim, and that includes the Mechaber himself, the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah, that is, these things are permitted to benefit from them, and there's also permission to cook them together, except for maras hayim. So, even though the Torah permits it, we have learned out that maras hayim will restrict this as well. Fish, meat, okay, and also the meat of the flesh of the kosher locust. There is no prohibition for cooking them or eating them with milk. Okay, but there does seem to be, if there is an issue with cooking fish with milk or not. We'll discuss that in more detail in a moment. Okay. We also learned in this sif that a almond milk or any other type of milk that is made from a product that would make a person think that you were potentially cooking regular milk with meat, there is a prohibition of maras hayim, and therefore you have to have the almonds present in the milk, or the cashews present, whatever milk is using, or oats present, to let people know that that's the case. Okay? And that would not be required according to the Ramah if it was chicken, only be required by beef. Okay? However, the Taz and the Shach and a bunch of other people all disagree that even by rabbinic restrictions, there's still a prohibition of maras hayim, and therefore it would be appropriate to put almonds in there. And if you don't have those things, then it seems that b'diavad that would be okay. And we also learned in that shir that many poskim hold that since some of these things are much more common than they were back in the day, there's less of a problem maras hayim, because people know and are much more aware of the difference between almond milk and cow's milk. Okay, and Sif Daled was a Sif we talked about using human milk. We talked about that also being included in the prohibition of maras hayim. And the Shach said over there that since there is a permission by the poskim, such as the Rashba and the Mechaber, okay, there seems to be that they would restrict the usage of it without putting something there to make you think that it's okay. So if you were using human milk, which is permitted for consumption, you could go ahead and drop almonds in it, so people know that it's not really milk, but the Ramah would say, nope, it's not a big deal. Okay, that would be fine without any noticeable thing in the milk by chicken. Okay, and again, that's the same issue back and forth. Okay, one thing that's important is that if a woman who is nursing, if some human milk fell into the cooking, then you don't need more than just rove to basically permit using it. You need the majority of it to be there, and you don't have to see it. It's fine. Okay, and so unless you took a whole lot in there, but even still, you could still reason to be lenient. And the other thing that we're leaning on is that as long as you use almonds to let people know that the milk that they see in there is parv, that would permit it as well. Okay, that's what they say. But there's an opinion in the Madnei Shulchan that says not to be lenient like that. But he also says that Madnei Shulchan that if certain things are common, then you don't have to be concerned about it. Now, let's take a quick dive into cooking fish with milk. Okay, the Beis Yosef in Simon Pei Zion here, so he's writing on the tour. He says the following: that fish and locusts are permitted to be eaten with milk, and then he cites the Ran. Okay, this Ran is in the beginning of Masechet Avodah Zarah. Okay. I'm sorry, no, it's in Chulin. It's on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. Since it's okay to cook them together, it also sounds like you could eat them together. Okay? So that's what it says. Because the prohibition of Basar Chalav is talking about cooking them together. And so fish and milk is fine. And the Rambam says the same thing. The Rash says the same thing. Okay? That if you eat milk with the fish, that's fine. Nonetheless, the what's it called? The Beis Yosef concludes that we don't eat them together because of the danger, and this was mentioned already earlier in my work in Orach Chaim Kuf Ayin Gimel. Okay, that's the Beis Yosef. Beis Yosef brings down that there's the custom not to eat dairy and fish together. So Lavush makes a comment on this, and he says that it's prohibited to eat fish with milk because of the danger. So the Lavush echoes that. However, the Archei Moshe says that he never saw such a custom. Right? He's Ashkenazi, and this is before bagels and cream cheese and lox. Right? So they didn't have bagels yet. Bagels come centuries later. Okay, so they say that. And also in Orach Chaim, he says, I don't know. And actually, the actual language of the Darchei Moshe, he says, Nischalfa habeis Yosef Basar im chalav, is quite a cute little dig on that. So, so the Shach makes the following observation. He says, so I looked at the Lavush. In this case, since it's written on Yoreh, Deah, it's called the Ateres Zahav. All right, the Lavush, this section was named the Ateres Zahav. He says we don't do it because of the danger that's associated with it, as it's mentioned in Orach Chaim. The truth is that the Lavush follows the opinion of the Beis Yosef, but it's a mistake because it's talking about fish with meat, and that's what's prohibited, and that's where the danger is. With milk, nope, never saw such a thing. Okay, and every single day we see people eating fish and milk together, and they eat it together. And the Darchei Moshe also makes that same statement. And another book also says that. And all these later authorities, basically, Shach in his time period, which is the early 17th century, right around the time of the Chmielnicki pogroms. Unfortunately, he lived through that. So it says pretty clearly that there's not an issue, and even the Gemara, he says it's not an issue. So the Taz takes a look at it, and he says the following. He says, there was actually a printing error, a scribal error in the book quoted by the Beis Yosef. Okay, and there's no room for us to say this, and it needs to say fish with meat and not fish with milk. And this is echoed by a Gemara Pesachim, the Pri Chadash, the Magen Avraham, and the Chida. Okay, So they all say that. So even Sephardi poskim are weighing in on that, saying that. So the Knesset Gedolah makes the following um, statement, and it's also found in the Pri Megadim, that there's a book called the Beis Lechem Yehuda, that there is a difference between milk that's cooked together with fish, where there's a danger, and also other types of things. So for things like for butter and for butter fat, that is okay. Okay, so it was the milk that was the problem, and that's what they say. And they also say that it's not something found in the words of Chazal, something that comes much later. This is also echoed by another book, the Zivchei Tzedek, that this minhag in Baghdad was for to fry fish in butter. Okay, but the Ben Ish Chai wrote there that only the Goyim do that, but with the Jews, the minhag is in Baghdad not to do that, and people should stay away from that. Okay, and the Pri Toar, another Sephardi author, he quotes the Rebbeinu Bachya that there is a concern for cooking fish with milk. Okay, and it doesn't matter if it's milk or butter or whatever it is, and many people are lenient and allow fish with the butter, and that would be okay. And there's also the Yad Ephraim and the Adonai Paz that who seem to say differently and say that nope, you should be concerned for it. Okay, the Kaf HaChaim, another Sephardi author, that he says that it's actually a minhag hamakom type of issue. It depends on where you're living. The custom is going to follow wherever it is that you're living. So if they have a minhag, you can follow it. So if there's a minhag to permit, then you should permit. And in a place where they have prohibited it, you follow that one. Okay, and the Chidushei HaGahos on the Beis Yosef also echoes that thought as well. Pri Megadim does say that one should also try to avoid having fish with milk because of how strict that is, of how strict it is to be careful about it. However, the Piskei Tshuva says that most of the world makes fish and milk together, so we say that there really is no reason to be strict on that. Okay, so that is that's sort of the raid on fish and milk. Okay. And let's see. Yeah, so that's where we will hold that. So that's where we come down. Basically, there's some interesting distinctions. So the minhag exists among Sardim, and I know some Ashkenazim who are very big into the words of the Pri Megadim. They're also makbid on these things. So there are some people who stay away from it, but most of the Jewish world, as we know, is not makbid on this, and it's very clear. Such a case, I was actually, in preparing for this part of this year, I looked into it a little bit, and apparently there is, in Italy, amongst the Italians themselves, not the Jews, but amongst the Italians, that it's forbidden to mix the fish and the dairy. You don't do such things. Why? It seems they have a tradition for that as well. So it seems that this custom developed as a regional custom and spread through different places, especially because you would have had a number of Jews living in Italy, and you had a number of Jews, like the Spanish Portuguese population that passed through there, could have taken this custom to other parts of the Middle East and so on. So that could explain why it found a place. And so it's not a clear one. But with this, we will wrap up the discussion on which types of meat and which types of milk are applied to which types of meat and milk are applied the prohibition of Basar Chalav. And we will pick up in our next year on which types of meat and which types of milk are going to have the prohibition of Basar Chalav applied to them. Meaning we're going further into this, looking at different parts of the animal, different forms of cooking that are explained in greater detail, and we'll be looking at Sifim Hey Vav Zayin and Ches in our next two shiurim. And so look forward to going through these topics with you. And please feel free to reach out to join the WhatsApp discussion if you so desire. Reach out to me directly. Otherwise, we will see you in the comments here on YouTube. Remember to like and subscribe and to share and to comment. We read your comments too.